welcome back to Mr. Excalibur. My name is Arthur, and today we're looking at Iberia's, or Hanwei, depending on which company name you want to use. It's such a long corporate title. This is Hanwei's, we'll use that term, Hanwei's Albrecht 2 hand-and-a-half sword. Now, the history behind this particular model is actually pretty long. This sword has been around for a long time. Some of the video footage that you guys will be seeing in this, that I've gotten from a few other sources, is as much as 10 years old. And so this model has been around, and currently Hanwei actually has this model in a number of different configurations. I got the sharp version to see what the blade would do. There are a number of other configurations that they have, so obviously it's a pretty popular hilt arrangement, I guess you could say, because the blades tend to be a little bit different. One of the things that I really noticed about this was just how long it had been around. This was one of Hanwei's first forays into making European swords, and so there's a lot of history, a lot of testing. But what I noticed on the internet when I started looking up videos and looking up reviews on the Albrecht 2 is that not a lot of people had done anything really significant as far as, okay, I've got it, and I'm going to go back in my backyard and cut, and by the way, this is how it was, or, you know, any things that myself or some of the other reviewers that are around today are doing with it. And so one of the things that I really wanted to do was kind of get an overall view of what people think of this particular model. One of the other things that I wanted to note here, first of all, is some disclaimers. I'm not a representative of any of the big distributors that distribute this model, including the one that I got this from. I actually got this from Sword Buyer's Guide, and then on top of that, I'm not a representative. Hanwei, Paul Chen, Iberia, you know, that huge long name that I keep on stumbling over. I'm not a representative of them. So just kind of give you an idea what the layout of this one's going to be is we've got the unboxing, a little bit slightly different kind of footage on that one to take a look at this a little closer. And then also we've got a number of different clips and experiences from other people that are in the cricket. Number of other people's experiences that people have graciously filmed and recorded for us on YouTube about this model. Then of course my own experiences, some data about it, and then a nice wrap up here at the end. So let's take a look at all that footage and and my experiences and some stats about the Albrecht 2 Hanwei's hand-and-a-half sword. Here we go. So here we are unwrapping the Albrecht II Hanwei's hand-and-a-half sword. It came pretty solidly packed, I have to admit. They had a nice outer box, and then of course inside you had an inner box, as you guys see here, with the prominently displayed label right there. Caution! The item in this box is sharp. It can do bodily harm. Don't point it up. You'll poke your eye out. Some real, sage advice there. And I have to say, Hanwei is about the only company I've ever seen that actually puts this warning label on their boxes. But you know what? That covers them as far as liability is concerned, I suppose. Inside, you guys see the thick styrofoam that actually it's not styrofoam. It's cushion that they've got around the sword. It secures it in there pretty well. This is a little similar to how Dark Sword Armory packages their stuff, only the big difference being Dark Sword Armory just gives you that inside box versus the outside box as well. Just kind of a point of reference there. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So getting the first impressions of the sword, I thought it was very light.
when I pulled it out. And the handle itself was extremely, I don't know, even though it is a hand-and-a-half sword, or bastard sword for those of you who are more familiar with that term, basically a sword that's well balanced enough to use in one hand but has room enough on the handle for two. I really didn't find that the case. In fact, I found it's actually pretty comfortable to use in one hand. The way they balance this thing out, I thought it was actually pretty nice just to use in one hand. Now, just some nice things about it when it came out of the box. It did come lubricated, so it's always nice when these swords come already oiled up. It's a nice way to take care of them. You never want to see rust spots on these. Believe it or not, after collecting swords for almost 30 years now, every once in a while you get a sword that for whatever reason wasn't taken care of properly when it was being stored, and it arrives to you with a little bit of rust. This one also arrived with a pretty good edge on it, and here I am, cutting paper on it. Usually European swords, despite, who makes them, don't come with quite that kind of edge. So with this kind of edge, I'm thinking, maybe some pretty nice results to come in the testing in the backyard, but we'll have to see for that. I wanted to get a closer look at this thing to give you guys an idea of the design of this. If you see there right on the throat of the scabbard, it kind of flares out just a little bit. Just kind of a nice little added thing. The blade has an incredibly rough grind on it, which I didn't think was too nice. I thought it gave it almost a very cheap look. To be honest with you, for those of you who've already seen this review of mine, the grind reminded me a whole lot of the grind they put on the Warrior Katana from Cold Steel. On the fuller there, this short fuller there, they have these two emblems. You'll see a little bit more about that in the stats section. It's got this very kind of stubby cross guard. They gave it this nice tip on the end of the scabbard. The scabbard itself looked like it was textured in order to look very similar to the leather around the handle, which of course has that look of having been wrapped with string, and then you get that nice almost kind of corded look to it. Another interesting thing about this sword that I had heard of, I had not seen this actually in any of the details, but I had heard that the pommel, this huge pommel that they've got on the end of the sword, while it's stainless steel, which is nice because that means it won't rust after your hand's been all over it, is actually hollow. I don't know if there's any truth to that or not, so I'm interested to see if anyone wants to comment about that. So I had kind of mixed feelings with this one coming right out of the box. Also, as I looked down the blade, it was wavy. The blade was kind of warped, and it kind of had a kind of a herky-jerky kind of way of getting in and out of the scabbard. So some mixed feelings here. This is the first of a number of different videos that people have done over the years of the Albrecht II, the hand-and-a-half sword by Hanwei. This is one of the oldest videos. In fact, it's the one that often is posted on websites that are selling the video. And it's just this, guy taking this, nice swing at a water bottle and cutting it in half. And then going, woo, Hanwei. And that's it. There's not a whole lot to it. This guy did a little bit more extensive of some cutting. He did some water bottles, and basically just showing that versus, kind of these very light little water bottles, the kind that get you a supermarket or Costco or whatever, they cut through them pretty well. This kind of backyard cutting thing. I wanted to take a moment here and kind of explain why I do these videos the way that I do them. Especially with a sword like this that has so many different reviews and so many different videos done of it, I kind of wanted this to be a bit of a collection point, a bit of a way of kind of getting a consensus of how people feel about this particular sword, or for that matter, any of them that I do. I don't include this footage from other people to, steal any thunder from any of these people. More along the lines to actually add, if you want to say add thunder to these people, and kind of remind people, yeah, there's videos of this product that are out there, and you should take a look at them all, just to kind of get an idea of what it does. So it's not a matter of, plagiarism or anything like that. What I would want to do is, especially, like I said, with a model like this that's had a lot of reviews over the years, to get kind of an overall consensus by gathering all of this material all together to get an idea of what this particular model does. And as you guys have seen so far, primarily this thing is a backyard cutter. So one can assume when one looks at these videos that the product that these people are getting is rather sharp, right out of the mail, right out of the box. And this guy is showing, as did the previous one, that, versus water bottles, this thing does pretty well. And I have to say, after pulling mine out of the box, that was my expectation as well. Now this guy does one thing that I thought that was really good, and that was he takes it versus some tatami mats, and he actually does a pretty good job of showing it. Now he does a pretty good, nice cutting here versus tatami mats, which I thought was pretty nice. You don't often see the European swords going up against tatami mats. Usually it's everything else. So this guy kind of stood alone. So I wanted to make sure you guys saw this and got a pretty good idea of what he was doing. Now he takes a swing here. We don't have a lot of footage of this, but he nicks it. He actually does cut through it. It had a post through it, and he actually does cut through it. This was a little clip that some guy took of this thing, and he cut some more bottles in his backyard, and these are some heavier like Clorox bleach bottles or stuff like that. This is a good time to remind you, this is some good lessons that I remembered from Backyard Samurai and some other guys that have done a lot of bottle cutting to test these swords out. And he takes a nice swipe at it, and it cuts pretty well. And that is, when you guys cut with these swords, whether it be European swords or Japanese katanas, whatever it is, be very aware that when you fill these things with water, it doesn't wash out, unless you do wash out whatever was in them. This guy's got either detergent or bleach or something in it. He's got milk on this one. It could have been hard water for cleaning, distilled water, what have you. And that stuff can actually end up being very corrosive on your blades, whichever sword you're using. And so this is a bit of a safety tip. Make sure that, when you're done with your sword, realize that it wasn't just water that you were cutting through. There was a bunch of other chemicals and things that were possibly in those containers before you filled them with water, and now they're all over your sword. And that can really prove corrosive. So safety tip, guys, or I should say, just kind of product advisory. When you guys are done with this, make sure you clean off your swords, because like I said, it wasn't just water that you had on them. So that's what this guy did with it. Our next person here actually did quite a bit. Now I included this mainly because a lot of the videos that he included here actually are within just the last couple years. The last ones that you guys have seen are all in the realm of like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. That's how long some of these videos of this sword have been around. So it gives you also an idea of how long the model's been around. And this guy did some pretty nice cutting of the bottles right here to start off. But he goes into a different kind of target. He does some pool noodles. Now, this is something, again, that usually the European swords don't do very well against, and yet here he is just slicing through them, and I thought that that was pretty telling for a sword like this. So, you know, for those of you watching this going, okay, you know, maybe this is something to consider. That was something that I thought was pretty good, because pool noodles are notoriously so light that they just kind of flop around, and the swords, unless they really are quite sharp, they just kind of just bat them and push them around. But as you guys are seeing here, this guy's actually got pretty decent form. He's actually whittling them down to size pretty well. I'm going to take this opportunity to kind of talk about the model that I got, and it's kind of some of the things that I saw in it. The blade did come sharp out of the box, but I thought the blade was very light compared to what I thought was going to be the case. The pictures are a little deceiving in my case. I think, in my opinion, it gives the opinion of a sword that's a lot more robust, and the blade actually came very very light. But the other issue that I had, as I mentioned before, was that it came warped, and that was a bit of a downer. I have to say that is one of my big pet peeves when I get these swords, and I don't care how much you pay for them. The sword should at least be straight, for crying out loud. If they, you know, if these makers can't even get that right, then, you know, in my opinion, they don't deserve your money. Now, I got to credit this guy. You notice what he does almost after every single bottle. He wipes off his sword. And that is something that, you know, I've tried to repeat over and over and over again in a lot of my footage as I work with these swords, and that is, you need to make sure you wipe off these swords. People go, oh, why is my sword all rusty? Well, it's because it was wet and it had all a bunch of who knows what on it, because of what was left over in those bottles after you were done, and then you put it in the scabbard for 2 months, and you pull it, and it's, you know, it's pot marked, it's pitted, it's rusting, and, you know, it's never going to look the same. These are high carbon steel swords, ladies and gentlemen, and you need to make sure you take care of them. And this guy does a pretty good job of it. So, you know, good on you for doing this. And, you know, he spends his time hacking through the bottles, and so thank you very much. So now, after all of that, after all of that footage, you can imagine what's going through my head. I'm looking forward to this. Now, I'm holding the pommel up here in a vain attempt to show you a bit of a problem that I have with the pommel and how it was constructed that I actually saw right out of the box. I'll talk about that in a minute after the stats section. Here we are looking at the Albrecht II Hanwei's hand-and-a-half sword, and just kind of giving an overall swing here outside. I have to say that the scabbard was very kind of jerky. I mean, it certainly holds a sword in place, and, you know, I suppose that's its point. This is not a sword you're going to take out to a Ren fair to demonstrate with, because it's sharp. So unless you are practicing, you know, some cutting, that may be the case. Now, one thing that I found is I've got these long, spindly hands. They're not necessarily big sausage fingers, but they're kind of very long, and I actually found with this sword to be very comfortable using it just one-handed. Now, as we look at this cutting footage, I do use it two hands because I wanted the power, but it was actually very comfortable to use one-handed. So, all right, here's our first attempt here. Get ready for the wind-up, and boing! Away it goes. Wow, how did that happen? Easy. Edge alignment was crap, and oh, look at that. Interesting, when you get your edge alignment right, slices right through. But this would not be the last little foible in this sword test. There would be other rather embarrassing episodes. Today just wasn't my day for cutting with this thing. After looking at all this cutting footage, I honestly thought that I was not going to have to do a whole lot to get this thing to cut. Well, I was wrong. These were some heavier plastic bottles than what you've seen in some of the previous cutting footage from other people, and this thing just did not have what it takes. I think what it has to do with the fact is that the blade is actually quite light. It's sharp, but it's very light, and it's very springy, and so it did more, at least in my experience, to bash the bottles rather than, just slice through them. I mean, there were some times when, I got a good slice here and there, but overall, the cutting with this sword just was not working for me. I don't know if it's me or, again, I'm not the greatest cutter in the world, but, I'm not the worst either, so I was wondering what really the problem was. But I have to say the sword really stayed firm as I was cutting through this. I mean, it didn't rattle, it didn't shake apart, it didn't do anything like that, so, I guess that's saying something. So we gave it another try on a couple of bottles, and it did all right. We gave it another swing here, and nope, still just kind of bouncing around. The bottles just did more bouncing. Oh, watch this. I'm going to try just a side cut on this thing and see what it does. Boom! And he gets a home run, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, let's try it one more time. Whoosh! Yeah, better edge alignment. Don't know. But now, here's where the sword really surprised. A wind up against the boxes, and wham! The thing cut about a foot down into those heavy-duty moving boxes. There's actually two of them stacked next to one another, folded together. Now let's take a look at the footage. Look how far that thing went down. Now that's way more than some of the other swords that I've used. And this is kind of an interesting thing with European swords, I have found. They excel at doing this, but when it comes to some of the water bottles, they either just bounce off of them or they don't cut them very much. But when it comes to this cardboard, they do a lot more damage than some. Now, for those of you thinking, wow, all that banging around, you must have, bent up the sword pretty good. No, take a look at the blade here. No edge rolling at all. Nothing. Nada. That 1566 steel stood up despite my, attempt to bang it on some pretty heavy-duty water bottles. So, say what you want about its cutting ability, it stood up to that kind of abuse. I'd be interested to see someone try and maybe break this thing, but there it is. Alright guys, as always, the last bit of, lessons, the do's and don'ts. This is a high carbon steel. They may have other things that have added into it, but it's primarily a high carbon steel. So always make sure you guys clean off these blades, whatever you choose to use to lubricate them. I try and use something that I can find around the house that does the job. But guys, always remember to clean off your swords after doing this kind of work with them, this kind of testing, review, practice, whatever you want. And so you've got them around to play with another day.
First, I wanted to talk about my overall impressions of the sword in general. You guys heard some comments that I made during the unboxing and then again during the cutting tests, but my overall impression of this is that the blade feels as if it was simply a kind of a sharpened girder of something. The grind on it is very rough, and what's worse, as I may have mentioned before, is that I don't know if the camera can really pick this up, but the blade has a distinct warp in it, and that's always discouraging when you get these things, when you look right down the edge and you can see either it's been ground very sloppily, or just in the process of it being forged and heated and then transporting over here from China. You don't really know what the different atmospheric conditions this thing goes through, but yeah, I look down the blade and it does this whole thing, and that's kind of discouraging. As you guys may have heard in some of my other videos, whenever I get those in swords, it's just really not all that great. Alright, so some notes here about the steel that's used. It's not a very common steel that we see throughout the industry as a whole. It's called 1566. It is still a high carbon steel. With that one in the front, we have indicated that it is a high carbon steel, and then of course the 66 at the end indicates approximately 0.66% high carbon. So it is a high carbon steel, and as you guys saw during the cutting footage, it stood up. It didn't, the blade didn't roll or bend or ding, even against some of those harder water bottles. Every once in a while I hit a neck and I was afraid I was going to ding it. Didn't ding. So it's pretty tough, and I've seen this plowed through a lot worse. One of the things I didn't care for design-wise was this very needle sharp point. It's really not necessary for a sword. You're not really going to be taking this and jamming this into someone's armor, but I suppose their theory is you could if you wanted to. Now a little bit more about the steel. 1566, even though it's a high carbon steel, they've added a lot of manganese, from what I understand, to the steel, and that allows it to be a very deep hardening steel. In other words, allows the tempering process to extend much further down into the molecular structure of the sword, making it very hard, but at the same time, you still got a very noticeable flexibility in the sword. One thing I also may have noted that I really didn't care for was how they did the hot peening. One of the things I really didn't care for was it looks like they literally put the pommel on and then started smacking the peen, and they dented the end of the pommel, and it just kind of looks really kind of sloppy. The blade didn't come very sharp, and I actually expected it to cut through some of the water bottles, and that just didn't happen. So maybe it's my own poor cutting ability. I don't know what the case was. The whole name Albrecht 2 refers to, from what I understand, a member of Austrian nobility, the Austrian aristocracy, and that's where this crest, I believe, comes from. One of the interesting things about this piece was that when it first came out, it was kind of hailed by some people as being, a nice historical representation of the original that this is based on. But one of the things that I found was that the characteristic really stubby hilt really would not be enough to... The hilt really wouldn't be significant enough in order to kind of, hook another opponent's hand or enemy. It just isn't quite long enough. And the pommel, which is also kind of a signature trait of this design, is too big to get one's hand around. I mean, I've got kind of these long, spindly hands, and I had a real hard time getting my hand, right here to where it was comfortable to use with two hands. So I don't think very much of the design. So anyway, so with the kind of blade, by the way, 1566 steel is from what I understand a proprietary steel of Hanwei. I don't know, my thoughts on it are kind of all over the place. It didn't cut all that well. The design is, I don't know, it's kind of sloppy. And I think for the price point, I got this for just under $300. And I think for that price point, perhaps for just a little bit more, you're going to get a much better European sword for cutting, for practicing. If you're someone who's in the European historical arts community, there are better options out there. But it's interesting to note that this model is very popular. It's been around a long time, and yet my example of it here was just subpar. I'm sorry if my verbiage here today is a little sloppy. It's just kind of all over the place. Again, interesting design, but in practicality, there's probably better ones out there. So my opinion is it worth your money? I would have to say no. No, it's not. There are definitely some better options out there. And so I would recommend, maybe looking at some other sources for European swords. So I hope this has been informative for you. Not a lot of real scientific information on this one, other than to say, well, the aesthetics are not very good. I didn't find the blade to be all that functional, despite actually being sharp. Although I do have to note one thing, and that is you saw how it plowed through that cardboard box, and that seems to be kind of a reoccurring theme with some of these European swords, regardless of the make. They do lousy on the bottles, but when it comes to the cardboard boxes, they just plow through them. And that may be very indicative of just kind of European blade design versus other designs that you guys have seen me test. So again, I hope this has been informative. I hope this has been something that will help you decide whether or not to get one of these things or test one out. That's all for now. And please subscribe to the channel. Remember, comment. I'd love to see people's comments on this thing. Like I said, this design's been around a long time, and so I'd like to see what people think of it. What have your experiences been, so on and so forth. So that's all for now. We'll see you guys later.